They call me Miguel Mike Ramirez, and I've been serving as sheriff of Presidio County, Texas for over 25 years. If you've driven west on Highway 90 through West Texas, leaving behind ghost towns and abandoned ranches, and crossed the endless desert where the horizon glitters like water that isn't really there, then you've passed through my jurisdiction. And if you're here after dark, you've probably seen them, the famous Marfa lights. People come from all over the world to watch these amazing lights dance across the desert. They set up lawn chairs at the viewing area 9 miles east of town. They take pictures, come up with theories, and of course, drink beer. UFOs, they say. Swamp gas, car headlights, atmospheric phenomena, and Apache spirits. I've heard every kind of explanation, but they're all wrong. Before continuing with the video, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. I know what the Marfa lights really are. I've known since October 15, 1998, the night the Reeves family disappeared. And after what happened last week, after finding those bodies in the old Shafter mine, arranged in patterns that hurt your eyes to look at, I can't keep quiet anymore. People need to know. You need to know. Because the lights aren't just some tourist attraction. They're hunters, and they're getting hungrier. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. Let me tell you about West Texas, about this land where Mexico bleeds into America, where the modern world sits uneasily on top of ancient ground that remembers when different gods walked here. I grew up in Presidio, right on the Rio Grande, where you can throw a rock and hit Mexico. My grandfather fought with Pancho Villa, my father was a ranch hand, and I was supposed to be the first Ramirez to go to college. Instead, I joined the Border Patrol at 18, spent 10 years learning to read the desert like a book, then came home to run for sheriff when old Tom Brennan retired. That was 1999. I'd already been deputy for a year when the Reeves family went missing. They were from Houston, dad, mom, 2 kids, aged 12 and 9. Driving out to California, decided to stop in Marfa to see the mystery lights. October in West Texas is perfect camping weather. Warm days, cool nights, sky so clear you can see the Milky Way like God spilled paint across the darkness. They set up their RV at the viewing area, planning to watch the lights and then move on in the morning. The call came in at 6 a.m. Another tourist found their RV abandoned, door hanging open, breakfast half-cooked on the stove, still burning. Coffee pot had boiled dry and cracked. Their car was there, keys in the ignition, cell phones on the table, wallet and purse untouched. But the Reeves family was gone. I remember standing in that RV, looking at the bacon turning black in the pan, and feeling something cold crawl up my spine. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints leading away, and in the desert, especially after a dry October, you can track anything that walks. It was like they'd just evaporated. But there was one thing. On the window, drawn in the condensation from the cooking, was a symbol. Looked like 3 circles connected by lines, with something in the center that made my eyes water to focus on. I took a photo, but when I developed it later, that part of the film was burned through, like someone had held a lighter to it. Old Tom Brennan, who was spending his retirement drinking coffee at the Desert Moon Cafe, pulled me aside that afternoon. "Mike," he said, and I'd never seen him look scared before, "you need to talk to Ana Morales." Ana Morales was 93 years old, Apache and Mexican, living in a trailer out past the Chenati Mountains. Her grandfather had been a scout for the army back when they were fighting the Apache Wars. She didn't much like visitors, especially cops, but she knew things about this land that nobody else remembered. When I showed up at her trailer, she was sitting outside in an old lawn chair, smoking a hand-rolled cigarette and watching the sunset. She looked at me for a long moment, then said in Spanish, "So they finally took some white people. Now you care. Anna, what do you know about this?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Sit down, boy. Let me tell you about the lights, the real lights, not the stories they sell to tourists." She told me that the lights had been here long before the white men came, long before even the Apache. The oldest peoples, the ones who built the ruins you find in caves throughout the Big Bend, they knew about the lights, called them the Hungry Ones. They would appear at night, beautiful and mesmerizing, drawing people out into the desert. But they weren't always active, Anna said, lighting another cigarette with shaking hands. They would sleep for years, decades even. Then something would wake them up. The Apache knew to avoid this area during those times. The Spanish learned the hard way, lost a whole expedition in 1684. Just vanished. Horses, men, everything. "What wakes them up?" I asked. She looked at me with clouded eyes. "Blood, violence, the kind of suffering that soaks into the ground. This land has seen plenty of that, hasn't it? The Indian Wars, the Mexican Revolution spilling over the border, the drug wars now. Every time there's enough death, enough pain, they wake up hungry. And they take people. Not just take," she corrected. "They hunt. They play with their food first. Make them see things, feel things. Drive them out into the desert, deeper and deeper, until they're so lost in their own minds they don't even remember they're being hunted. Then," she made a gesture like something dissolving, "they feed on the fear, the confusion. The bodies, if you ever find them, they look like they've been scared to death. Every cell in their body just gave up." I wanted to dismiss it as an old woman's superstitions, but I'd seen too much in my years on the border to completely discount anything. The desert holds secrets. Every cop and border patrol agent who works out here long enough learns that. There are things in the Big Bend that don't match any wildlife guide. Sounds that don't come from any animal we've cataloged. Places where compasses spin and GPS units show you're somewhere you're not. "How do I find the Reeves family?" I asked. Anna was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You don't. Once the lights take someone, they're gone. But if you want to try, you need to understand something first. The lights aren't really lights. They're openings, windows. What you see glowing is just the friction between their world and ours. And sometimes, if the conditions are right, things can pass through. Both ways." She stood up, surprisingly quick for her age, and went into her trailer. She came back with something wrapped in an old cavalry blanket. "This was my grandfather's," she said, unwrapping it to reveal an obsidian knife, the blade so black it seemed to swallow light. "He took it from a place that shouldn't exist out in the desert. A place where the lights come from. If you're going after them, you'll need this. Regular weapons won't work. They're not really here, you see. Not all the way, but this can cut things that aren't entirely real." I took the knife, feeling the weight of it. It was cold, colder than stone should be, and holding it made my teeth ache. "One more thing," Anna said as I was leaving. "The lights are getting stronger. Every year they can reach a little further from their source. Used to be they could only hunt within a mile of the viewing area. Now they can go as far as town. And there's something else." "What?" "Someone's been feeding them. Deliberately. Bringing them offerings. I've seen the tire tracks heading out to places no tourist should know about. Someone who knows what they really are and wants them to get stronger." That night, I went out to the viewing area alone. Sure enough, around 11 p.m., the lights appeared. 3 of them, dancing on the horizon. yellow-white like old stars. Beautiful. Mesmerizing. I watched them through binoculars, trying to see them as windows, as openings like Anna had said. That's when I saw it. For just a moment, when one of the lights flickered, I saw through it, and what I saw made me drop the binoculars and reach for my gun, even though I knew it wouldn't help. There was something on the other side, a landscape that wasn't desert, wasn't anything on Earth. Twisted structures that might have been buildings or might have been living things, and moving between them, tall figures that walked wrong, like their joints bent in too many places. One of them turned toward me, and even from miles away I felt it see me. The light flared, and when my vision cleared, it was just a light again. But now I knew. The Marfa lights weren't UFOs. They weren't ghosts. They were windows, and something on the other side was looking through. I spent the next 3 days searching for the Reeves family, following Anna's directions to places where reality felt thin. I found their tracks finally, out near an old mine shaft. 4 sets of footprints walking in perfect synchronization, like they were being marched. The tracks led to the edge of the shaft and then nothing. Either they went in or they simply ceased to exist. I rappelled down into the mine with the team. 50 feet down, we found them. They were alive, technically, sitting in a circle, holding hands, their eyes open but not seeing anything in this world. They were whispering in unison, but not in English, not in Spanish, not in any language I'd ever heard. When we tried to move them, they screamed, all 4 of them, the exact same sound at the exact same moment. We got them to the hospital in Alpine, but the doctors couldn't find anything physically wrong with them. No drugs in their system, no head injuries, nothing. But they never came back, not really. The parents died within a week, just stopped breathing. The kids lasted longer, but they never spoke again, never acknowledged anyone. They'd just stare at windows, watching something the rest of us couldn't see. That was my first real encounter with what the Marfa lights truly were. But it wasn't my last, and it wasn't the worst. Because Anna was right about something else. Someone was feeding them. Someone who understood what they were and wanted them to grow stronger. It took me years to figure out who, and by then, it was almost too late. The feeding started subtly. Hitchhikers who disappeared without anyone filing missing persons reports. Migrants crossing the border who vanished in areas nowhere near where the cartels operated. People nobody would miss, nobody would look for. But I was looking. I was mapping every disappearance, every sighting, building a pattern. The lights were appearing more frequently. Used to be you'd see them maybe once a week. By 2005, it was every night. By 2010, they were appearing in daylight. Faint, but visible. And the zone where people could disappear was expanding. First, it was just near the viewing area. Then anywhere along Highway 90. Then all the way to town. I tried to warn people, put out safety advisories about dangerous wildlife in certain areas. Tried to get the state involved. But you know what happened? Tourism increased. More people came to see the enhanced Marfa lights phenomenon. The town was making money. Hotels were full. Restaurants were thriving. Nobody wanted to hear that their cash cow was actually a predator. Then, in 2012, my brother disappeared. Carlos had been working the night shift at the Border Patrol checkpoint on Highway 67. Good job, steady pay, close enough to visit our mom in Presidio every weekend. He called me at 2 a.m. on November 3rd, said he was seeing lights near the checkpoint but not in the usual place. These were closer, moving along the fence line. "Mike," he said, and I could hear the fear in his voice, "they're not acting like the normal lights. They're following the fence like they're looking for something or someone." "Get inside," I told him. "Lock down the checkpoint and don't go out until sunrise." "I can't. There's someone out there. I can see them walking toward the lights." "Shit, it's a kid. There's a kid out there." The line went dead. I drove out there doing 90, sheriff's lights blazing. Found the checkpoint empty, door open, Carlos's gun still in its holster on the desk. His tracks led out toward the fence, then just stopped. And in the dirt, drawn with a stick or a finger, was that same symbol I'd seen in the Reeves' RV. 3 circles connected by lines, with something in the center that hurt to look at. I never found Carlos. Never found a body. Never found any trace of him beyond those footprints that ended in nothing. But sometimes when I watch the lights, I swear one of them moves like him. Has his walk, that little limp he got from a high school football injury. Sometimes I think I hear his voice calling from out in the desert, asking for help. That's when I got serious about finding who was feeding them. Because this wasn't random anymore. This was targeted. Someone had used my brother as bait, or payment, or sacrifice. Someone who knew exactly what buttons to push to get him out of that checkpoint. The investigation into who was feeding the lights became my obsession. Every night after my official shift ended, I'd drive the back roads of Presidio County looking for patterns. Who had access to move freely at night? Who knew the desert well enough to lead people to specific locations? Who had been here long enough to understand what the lights really were? I started with the obvious suspects. The human traffickers who moved people across the border, the drug runners who used the remote ranches as waypoints. But they avoided the lights areas. Even the cartels, brutal as they were, knew better than to mess with certain things in the desert. There's a saying among the coyotes who guide migrants, "La luz de Marfa no es para nosotros." The Marfa lights are not for us. Then I looked at the locals, the ranchers who'd been here for generations, the artists who'd moved to Marfa for the isolation and inspiration, the military contractors who still worked at the mysterious facilities scattered throughout the Big Bend. Everyone had alibis. Everyone had reasons they couldn't be involved. But someone was lying. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Father Martinez at the Sacred Heart Church in Presidio came to me in March of 2013. He was nervous, kept looking over his shoulder like someone might be listening. "Sheriff, I need to tell you something, but it's under the seal of confession. I shouldn't be here." "Padre, if someone's in danger, everyone's in danger," he interrupted. "There's a man who comes to confession, American, but speaks perfect Spanish, old Spanish, the kind my grandmother used. He confesses to feeding the lights, says he's been doing it for decades, that it's his duty, his burden." "Who is he?" "I don't know his name." He's careful about that. But he said something last week that scared me. He said the lights have almost reached critical mass. That soon they won't need to be fed anymore. They'll be able to hunt on their own, anywhere, anytime. What does that mean? Father Martinez crossed himself. He said once they're strong enough, they can open the door from their side. Permanently. And when that happens, it won't just be people disappearing 1 or 2 at a time. It'll be everyone. I pressed him for more details, but that's all he had. A voice in the confessional, speaking of ancient pacts and necessary evils. But it was enough to narrow my search. Someone who'd been here for decades, who spoke old Spanish, who had the knowledge and ability to feed the lights regularly. That's when I remembered the Blackwood Ranch. Artemis Blackwood had bought the ranch in 1946, right after the war. 20,000 acres of desert and scrubland, butting up against the Big Bend National Park. He was from back east, old money, claimed he'd come to Texas for his health. Built a massive house out there, Spanish colonial style, brought in architects from Mexico City. But here's the thing, nobody ever saw him in town. His supplies were delivered, His workers came from Mexico and lived on the ranch. In 67 years, I could count on one hand the number of times anyone had actually seen Artemis Blackwood. But that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was that, according to everyone who had seen him, he hadn't aged a day since 1946. I know how that sounds. Believe me, I'm not one for vampire stories or fountain of youth bullshit. But in West Texas, you learn that strange doesn't mean impossible. The desert does things to time, to reality. Places where a day can feel like a year, where you can walk for hours and end up where you started. And if the lights were windows to somewhere else, who's to say what could come through, or what bargains could be made? I drove out to the Blackwood Ranch on a Tuesday afternoon. No backup, no warrant. Just a social call, sheriff checking on an old resident. The gate was locked, but I had bolt cutters. The road to the main house was 7 miles of dirt track, winding through canyons and arroyos that looked like they'd been carved by giant claws. The house, when I finally saw it, was wrong. I don't mean architecturally. It was beautiful, all white stucco and red tile, courtyards and fountains. But it was wrong in the way that made your eyes keep sliding off it, like your brain didn't want to process what it was seeing. And it was cold. In the middle of a Texas afternoon, where the temperature was pushing 95, the air around the house was cold enough to see your breath. I parked and walked to the front door, hand on my sidearm. Before I could knock, it opened. Artemis Blackwood looked exactly like the descriptions from 1946. Tall, thin, pale as paper, with eyes that were almost colorless. He was wearing a suit that looked like it cost more than my annual salary, and his smile was the kind that never reached his eyes. "Sheriff Ramirez," he said, and his voice had a strange echo to it, like he was speaking from the bottom of a well. "I've been expecting you." "Mr. Blackwood, mind if I come in? Got some questions about recent disappearances in the area." "Of course, though I'm afraid I won't be much help. I rarely leave the ranch." The inside of the house was like a museum. Artifacts from all over the world, but especially from Mexico and Central America. Aztec calendars, Mayan stelae, things that should have been in museums but were sitting in his living room like knickknacks. And everywhere, that same symbol, 3 circles connected by lines. "Beautiful collection," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've had time to accumulate things." Tea? We sat in a room that overlooked the desert. Through the windows, I could see for miles, all the way to where the Marfa lights would appear after dark. It was the perfect observation post. "You've been here since 46, I said. "Must have seen a lot of changes." "Oh, yes. The town has grown, shrunk, grown again. The lights have become quite the tourist attraction, though they've been here much longer than I have." "How much longer?" He smiled that cold smile again. "How old is the Earth, Sheriff?" "The lights have been here since the first humans looked up at the stars and wondered what looked back. They're not from here, of course. They're from elsewhere. A place where the laws of physics are more like suggestions. A place that's dying. You know what they are. I know everything about them. I've been feeding them for 67 years. Just like that. No denial. No games." He admitted it like he was telling me about the weather. "Why?" I asked, my hand moving to my gun. "Because the alternative is worse. Sit down, Sheriff. Let me tell you a story." Against my better judgment, I sat. Blackwood poured himself tea from a pot that steamed despite the room being freezing cold. "In 1945, I was part of a special unit. We called ourselves the Ontological Research Division. While Oppenheimer was splitting atoms, we were trying to split reality itself. The war was ending, but we knew the Soviets would be our next enemy. We needed weapons they couldn't counter, couldn't even understand. He pulled out a photograph, old and yellowed. It showed a group of men in military uniforms standing in front of what looked like the viewing area near Marfa. We knew about the lights, of course. The military had been studying them since the 1920s. We thought if we could understand them, harness them, we could create portals. Imagine being able to transport troops instantly anywhere in the world, or better yet, being able to send our enemies somewhere else. What happened? We succeeded. On July 2nd, 1945, 2 weeks before Trinity, we opened a door. Not a small window like the lights, but a full doorway. We sent a team through. He paused, sipping his tea. His hands, I noticed, were shaking slightly. They came back changed. Not physically. They looked the same, but they'd seen things, learned things. They told us about the other side, about the entities that lived there. A dying universe where entropy had almost won, where the last intelligent beings were looking for a way out. And they'd found one. Us. The lights. The lights were their scouts, their probes. Testing our reality, seeing if it could support them, but they needed more. They needed anchors, living beings from our world to stabilize the connection. That's what happens to the people who disappear. They become anchor points, holding the door open from the other side. So you've been feeding them people for 67 years, to keep them contained. You see, Sheriff, we made a deal. The entities, they don't want to invade. They just want to survive. But if they all came through at once, the shock to our reality would tear it apart. Both universes would collapse. So we negotiated, a few at a time. Controlled immigration, you might say. And in return, knowledge, technology, the smartphone in your pocket, GPS, the internet. Where do you think those ideas came from? We've been trading lives for advancement. A few disappear so millions can benefit. I stood up, drew my gun. You're under arrest for murder, kidnapping. Sit down, Sheriff. His voice changed, became something that bypassed my ears and spoke directly to my brain. My legs gave out and I collapsed back into the chair. You can't arrest me. I'm not entirely human anymore. Part of the deal. I age one day for every year, and I can see through the windows. I know you've been looking for your brother. Where is he? On the other side. Still alive, in a sense. Time moves differently there. For him, it's been minutes since he crossed over. He's waiting, Sheriff. They're all waiting. And soon, the waiting will be over. What do you mean? Blackwood stood and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was setting, and in the distance the first of the lights was beginning to appear. The contract is almost complete. 1,000 souls over 70 years. We're at 997, 3 more, and the door opens permanently. But controlled, managed, a proper gateway between worlds, not a wound that bleeds reality. And if we don't give them 3 more, then they take them anyway, and the door opens wrong. Violently. The kind of dimensional rupture that would make nuclear war look like a firecracker. Every human within 1,000 miles would be pulled through instantly. The survivors, if you could call them that, would exist in both realities simultaneously, going mad from seeing 2 sets of physical laws trying to exist in the same space. You're lying. He pulled out a tablet, started showing me video files. Military footage from the 40s and 50s. Experiments. Test subjects exposed to the light, their bodies twisting into impossible shapes. Scientists taking measurements as people dissolved into probability clouds. And worse things. Things that had come through from the other side when the barriers were weak. This is what we've prevented, Sheriff. This is why I do what I do. Not because I enjoy it, but because someone has to. Someone has to choose who goes so that everyone else can stay. My brother, Was chosen because he was alone, because he had no children, because his disappearance would cause pain but not societal collapse. I know that's no comfort, but would you rather I had taken a school bus, a hospital, because that's what they'll do if the contract is broken? I wanted to shoot him. Every fiber of my being wanted to put a bullet in his head, but I knew it wouldn't work. Whatever he'd become, he wasn't something that could be killed with conventional weapons. "Show me," I said finally. "Show me the other side. Show me where my brother is." Blackwood smiled, and for the first time it seemed genuine. "Very well, but understand, Sheriff, once you see it, you can't unsee it. You'll be like me, forever balanced between two worlds, never fully belonging to either." He led me to a room in the basement, carved from the bedrock itself. The walls were covered with that same symbol, repeated thousands of times, and in the center was something that looked like a pool of mercury, except it reflected things that weren't in the room. "Look into it," he said, "but don't touch it. And whatever you see, whatever calls to you, don't answer." I looked, and I saw. The other side was a place of impossible geometry, where buildings grew like living things, and the sky was the color of old blood. Beings that might once have been human moved through the landscape, but they'd been changed, adapted to survive in a universe where entropy was winning. They were elongated, translucent, their bodies stretching and compressing as they moved, and there, among them, was Carlos. He looked almost normal, except for his eyes. They'd gone completely black, reflecting the alien stars of that dying universe. He was standing with others I recognized, people who'd disappeared over the years. They weren't suffering exactly, but they weren't happy either. They existed in a state of suspension, waiting. Carlos turned, and somehow he saw me. His mouth moved, forming my name, and I heard his voice in my head. "Mike, don't let them complete it. It's not what Blackwood says. They're lying. They don't want coexistence. They want—" Blackwood pulled me back, breaking the connection. "That's enough. The longer you look, the more you're pulled in. Some of my predecessors looked too long. They're over there now, with your brother." "He said you're lying." "Of course he did. The entities control them, speak through them. They'll say anything to prevent the contract from being completed properly. They want chaos, not order. They want the door blown open, not carefully managed." I didn't know who to believe. My brother, trapped in an alien dimension, or the man who'd put him there claiming it was for the greater good. I left the Blackwood Ranch that night with more questions than answers, and a decision that would haunt me forever. Blackwood had given me an ultimatum. Help him complete the contract with 3 more selections, or watch as the entities tore through the barrier and consumed everyone I'd sworn to protect. He gave me 3 days to decide. I drove back to town through the darkness, the Marfa lights dancing in my rearview mirror like eyes watching me go. My hands were shaking so bad I had to pull over twice. The second time, I threw up on the side of Highway 90, my body trying to reject what my mind had seen. That other world, those changed people, my brother's black eyes, it was all burned into my brain like a brand. When I got back to the office, Deputy Janet Rodriguez was waiting for me. Janet had been with the department for 5 years, smart as a whip, tough as leather. She took one look at me and knew something was wrong. "Jesus, Mike, you look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse," I said, collapsing into my chair. "Janet, I need you to pull everything we have on missing persons going back to 1946. Every single case. That's going to be hundreds of files. 997 to be exact." She gave me a strange look but started pulling records. While she worked, I made a call to Austin, to a friend in the Texas Rangers who specialized in cold cases. Tom Ashford had seen enough weird shit over the years that he might actually believe me. "Mike, you sound rough," he said when he answered. "Tom, I need you to look into someone for me. Artemis Blackwood. Came to Texas in 1946. I need military records, immigration documents, anything you can find. This about those disappearances down your way?" "It's about all of them, Tom. Every disappearance in West Texas for the last 70 years. There was a pause. "Mike, are you drinking?" "I wish I was. Just trust me on this. And Tom, be careful. This guy, he's not what he seems." I hung up and turned to find Janet staring at me, a stack of files in her arms and a look of horror on her face. "Mike, these patterns, they're not random. Look," she spread out a map, started marking locations with red pins. "Every disappearance happens within a specific radius of the lights, but that radius has been growing, and they happen in cycles, 3 here, 3 there, always in threes. Until recently," I said, looking at the pattern. "The last 2 years, they've been taking more. Building up to something." "To what?" Before I could answer, the lights in the office flickered and went out. Emergency power kicked in a second later, bathing everything in red light. Then we heard it. A sound like glass breaking in reverse, sharp and wrong. The windows of the office were covered in frost, impossible in the Texas heat. And through the frost, something was writing. That same symbol, 3 circles connected by lines. "Janet, get everyone out of the building, now." "What's happening?" "They know I know. They're coming." She didn't argue, just hit the evacuation alarm. As deputies and staff fled the building, I grabbed the obsidian knife Anna Morales had given me and headed for the roof. I don't know why, instinct maybe, or some knowledge I'd absorbed from looking into that mercury pool. On the roof, the lights were there. Not miles away at the viewing area, but right here, hovering over the sheriff's office. 3 of them, pulsing in sequence, and in their glow, I could see through to the other side. The beings were pressed against the barrier, waiting. One of them pushed through partially, its elongated arm reaching into our world. Where it touched the roof, the concrete aged decades and seconds, crumbling to dust. It reached for me, and I heard its voice in my head. Not words, but concepts, images, feelings. It showed me what would happen if the contract was completed Blackwood's way. The door would open, yes, but controlled. The entities would come through slowly, integrating with humanity over generations. They wouldn't conquer, they would merge. Human DNA mixing with something else, creating a new species. Evolution through invasion. Then it showed me what would happen if the contract was broken. The images were worse. Reality itself unraveling. Both universes collapsing into a singular point of infinite density and zero possibility. The end of everything. But then, it showed me a third option. I slashed at the arm with the obsidian knife, and the entity recoiled with a sound like steam escaping. Black ichor splattered on the roof, sizzling and evaporating. The lights flickered and pulled back, but the message was clear. I called Blackwood from the roof, still holding the knife. "Impressive, Sheriff," he said, not even bothering with hello. "Anna's blade, I assume. One of the few things that can hurt them in their transitional state." "They showed me the third option," I said. Silence on the other end. Then, "There is no third option. There is. Close the door permanently, seal the breach. No contract, no invasion, no merger, just separation. Impossible. The door can't be closed, only managed." "You're lying." They showed me how. It requires a sacrifice, but not the kind you've been making. It requires someone to go through willingly, carrying something from our world that's anathema to theirs. Something that would poison their reality so badly they'd have to seal the breach just to survive. And what would that be? I looked at the obsidian knife in my hand. This blade that exists partially in both realities. If someone carried it through and shattered it on the other side, it would create a paradox. An object that simultaneously exists and doesn't exist in their universe. The only way to resolve the paradox would be to completely sever the connection between worlds. That's theoretical at best, and whoever carried it through would be trapped on the other side forever. I know. You're thinking of your brother. I'm thinking of everyone. Every family that's lost someone to your contract. Every person living in fear of the lights. This ends now, Blackwood. If you try this and fail, everyone dies. Both universes collapse. Then I guess I better not fail. I hung up and turned to find Janet on the roof with me, along with Tom Ashford. He'd driven down from Austin after my call, breaking every speed limit on the way. "Mike, what the hell is going on?" Tom asked, his hand on his weapon. I explained everything, showed them the files, the patterns, told them about Blackwood and the contract. Tom's expression went from skeptical to horrified to determined. "So, we need to stop 3 more people from being taken, or find 3 volunteers to complete the contract, or you're going to carry a magic knife through an interdimensional portal to save the world." That about sums it up. "Well," Janet said, checking her sidearm, "when you put it like that, the choice is obvious. We stop Blackwood from taking anyone else, and we find another way." But Blackwood wasn't going to make it easy. That night, the lights appeared everywhere, not just at the viewing area, but throughout the county. People reported seeing them outside their windows, in their yards, hovering over their cars on dark roads. And 3 people disappeared: a homeless veteran from Alpine, a hitchhiker on Highway 90, and Maria Santos, a single mother from Presidio. Maria's disappearance hit the hardest. She had 3 kids, all under 10. They said their mother had walked out of the house in the middle of the night, moving like she was sleepwalking, following a light that sang to her. We found her car at the viewing area, engine still running. Her footprints led out into the desert, joined by 2 other sets of tracks. The veteran and the hitchhiker, I assumed. They'd walked in perfect formation, like soldiers, straight toward where the lights usually appeared. But they hadn't vanished. Not yet. We could see them in the distance, standing in a circle with the lights rotating around them. They were waiting. "It's a trap," Tom said, binoculars pressed to his eyes. "Blackwood wants us to come after them." "Or he wants witnesses," Janet suggested, "for the completion of the contract. Either way, we can't leave them there." We approached carefully, weapons drawn. The 3 people didn't react to our presence, just stood there with blank expressions, their eyes reflecting the light like mirrors. The lights spun faster as we got closer, and I could feel that pulling sensation, like something tugging at the inside of my chest. "Sheriff Ramirez." Blackwood's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "Just in time for the finale." He materialized from the darkness, but not quite solid. I could see through him slightly, like he was only partially in our reality. "Let them go, Blackwood." "I'm afraid it's too late for that. The contract must be completed. These 3 will make 1,000, and the door will open properly. Controlled, managed, safe. Safe for who? Not for the 1,000 people you've fed to those things. Safe for the billions who won't be consumed when reality collapses. You think you're being noble, Sheriff, but you're being selfish. You want your brother back. You want to believe there's a perfect solution where everyone lives. There isn't." The lights pulsed, and I saw through them again. The entities were massed on the other side, ready to pour through, But behind them, I saw something else. The people who'd been taken. All 997 of them. They weren't just waiting. They were organized. They'd formed their own community on the other side, adapted to the alien environment. And they were fighting back. Carlos was at the front, holding something that looked like a weapon made of crystallized light. He and the others were holding the entities back, preventing them from reaching the portal. "Mike." His voice came through the dimensional barrier. "Now." While we hold them, I understood. The Taken weren't helpless victims. They'd become an army, humanity's foothold in the other reality, and they were giving me an opening. I pulled out the obsidian knife and ran toward the lights. Blackwood moved to stop me, but Tom and Janet opened fire. Their bullets passed through him, but the iron in them disrupted his partially phased state, making him solid enough for the obsidian blade to matter. I slashed at him as I passed, opening a gash across his arm that bled something that wasn't quite blood. He screamed, a sound that existed in multiple dimensions at once, and collapsed. The three people in the circle, Maria, the veteran, the hitchhiker, suddenly woke from their trance. Janet and Tom grabbed them, pulling them away from the lights. But I kept going, running straight at the largest light, the one that showed the clearest view of the other side. "Mike, no!" Janet screamed. But I'd made my choice, not to complete the contract, not to break it, but to change it entirely. I dove through the light, carrying the obsidian knife, entering the space between worlds. The sensation was indescribable. Every atom in my body tried to go in a different direction. I could feel myself dissolving, becoming probability rather than matter. But the knife anchored me, its paradoxical existence giving me something to hold on to. I landed, if you could call it landing, in the other reality. The ground beneath me wasn't solid, more like condensed possibility. The sky above was every color at once, and none of them. And all around me were the Taken, the 997 people Blackwood had fed to the lights over 7 decades. But they weren't victims anymore. They'd adapted, evolved, become something between human and other. Carlos was there, my brother, changed, but still recognizably himself. "Mike, you beautiful idiot," he said, pulling me to my feet. "You actually did it. The knife will work, but not the way you think. We don't need to destroy it to create a paradox, we need to plant it, like a seed. It'll grow into a barrier, a permanent wall between the worlds, but someone has to tend it, to make sure it takes root." "I'll stay," I said. "No," Carlos replied. "We will. All of us. We've been here long enough to survive in this place. We've learned their language, their science. We can build something here, a human colony in their reality. Not invasion or merger, but coexistence at a distance. Neighbors with a really good fence. The entities surrounded us, tall and impossible, their forms shifting between states of matter, but they weren't attacking, they were listening. One of them approached, and I recognized it as the one that had reached through to our world. It touched my mind, and I understood. They didn't want to invade any more than we wanted to be invaded. They were just desperate, dying, looking for any way to survive. "There's another way," I said, holding up the knife. "This can create a stable barrier. Your world and ours, separate but connected. Small windows for communication, trade maybe, but no more taking people, no more feeding, and in exchange." "What?" the entity asked, its voice like grinding glass. "We teach you how to fix your reality, how to reverse the entropy. Humans are good at fighting inevitability. It's kind of our thing." The entity considered this. Around us, the Taken humans and the alien beings stood in tense silence. Finally, it reached out one impossible hand. Agreement, it said. I drove the obsidian knife into the ground of that alien world. It sank in like the soil had been waiting for it, and immediately things began to change. The knife grew, spreading roots of black glass through the quantum foam, creating a lattice that would become an impermeable barrier between worlds. But it left windows. Small ones, controlled ones. The Marfa lights would remain, but they'd be what the tourists thought they were. Just lights. Pretty, mysterious, but harmless. Communication portals, nothing more. The journey back through the portal was different from the entry. Where before I'd felt like I was being torn apart, now I moved through it like water. The obsidian barrier guiding me home. I emerged at the viewing area just as the sun was rising, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Janet and Tom were there, along with half the sheriff's department and a confused crowd of tourists who'd come for the lights and gotten far more than they'd bargained for. "Mike!" Janet ran to me, helping me stand. "You've been gone for 3 hours. We thought, 3 hours?" To me, it had felt like minutes. Time really did move differently between worlds. "Where's Carlos?" she asked, looking at the now calm lights, which flickered benignly in the dawn, already fading as the sun rose. "He's staying. They all are. The 997 taken over the years. They're alive, they're adapted, and they're going to make sure the barrier holds from their side." Blackwood was sitting on the ground, his arm bandaged where I'd cut him, surrounded by state troopers. He looked older somehow, more human. The wound from the obsidian knife had severed his connection to the other reality, trapping him fully in ours. "You've doomed us all," he said, his voice hoarse. "Without the contract, without controlled integration, both species will stagnate. Evolution requires fusion. Evolution requires choice," I corrected. "And now both sides have one. They can communicate, learn from each other, but nobody's forcing anyone through portals anymore. No more feeding the lights. The entities won't survive without— They will. The humans on their side are teaching them something they'd forgotten. Hope. How to fight entropy with creativity instead of consumption. And in return, they're teaching us about dimensions of reality we never knew existed. It's not a perfect solution, but it's better than slavery or extinction." The federal government arrived that afternoon. Not just FBI, but people from agencies I'd never heard of, with acronyms that probably stood for something classified. They took Blackwood, confiscated his ranch, and tried to take all our evidence, but Tom had already uploaded everything to multiple secure servers, and Janet had hidden physical copies all over the county. We weren't going to let this disappear into some black site. The official story was a gas leak at the viewing area that caused mass hallucinations. The 3 people who'd almost been taken, Maria, the veteran, the hitchhiker, were treated for exposure and released. They didn't remember much, which was probably a mercy. But the real change came slowly, quietly over the following months. The lights still appeared, but they were different now. Instead of hunting, they seemed to be communicating. People reported hearing music sometimes, complex mathematical harmonies that musicians tried desperately to transcribe. Others saw images in the lights, landscapes from the other world, beautiful and terrible, broadcast like a slideshow from another dimension. A linguistics professor from UT Austin claimed she'd decoded a pattern in the light's movements. It was a language, she said, based on quantum probability rather than linear syntax. Within a year, we had basic communication established. The entities had names for themselves, the Watchers, roughly translated. They'd been observing our universe for millennia, trying to understand how we'd avoided the entropy that was consuming theirs. The answer, it turned out, was embarrassingly simple: love. Not in some mystical sense, but literally. The connections between conscious beings in our universe created a kind of quantum entanglement that resisted entropy. Every relationship, every emotional bond, was a tiny anchor against the dissolution of reality. The Watchers had evolved beyond such connections, becoming so alien that they'd lost the very thing that could save them. But the 997 humans on their side were teaching them to connect again. Carlos sent messages through the light sometimes, updates on their progress. They'd established a colony, a bubble of human reality in the alien dimension. Children had been born there. Human children who could naturally perceive both realities. They were the bridge, the translators who would help both species understand each other. Artemis Blackwood was tried in a federal court so secret that officially it never happened. He was convicted of 997 counts of kidnapping and conspiracy to commit interdimensional human trafficking, probably the first person in history to face that particular charge. He was sentenced to life in a facility that specialized in anomalous individuals. I heard rumors that they were studying him, trying to understand how he'd survived partial integration with another reality for so long. Before they took him away, he said something to me that I still think about. "You think you've won, Sheriff, but you've just delayed the inevitable. The barrier won't hold forever. The knife will decay, quantum decoherence will set in, and eventually, the door will open again. And when it does, there won't be anyone left who remembers how to close it." Maybe he's right. Maybe someday, long after I'm gone, the barrier will fail. But that's not my problem to solve. I did what I could with the time I had. I saved the people I could save. And I gave both species a chance to find their own way forward. The Blackwood Ranch was converted into a research facility, jointly operated by the U.S. government and a consortium of universities. They study the lights, develop communication protocols, and monitor the barrier's stability. Dr. Sarah Chen, the linguistics professor who'd cracked the light's movement patterns, became the director. She sends me updates sometimes, videos of conversations with the Watchers, images from the other side that Carlos and the colonists transmit. Janet Rodriguez took over as sheriff when I retired last year. Turns out, saving the world from interdimensional invasion is a good pension negotiator. She keeps things quiet in Presidio County, manages the tourists who come to see the lights, and makes sure nobody gets too close to the truth. The full truth would cause panic, but the partial truth, that the lights are a communication system with another intelligence, has actually been good for the town. Marfa's become a hub for theoretical physicists, artists, and philosophers. The Desert Moon Cafe now serves something called quantum coffee, which is just regular coffee but costs 3 times as much. Tom Ashford wrote a book about the experience, disguised as fiction. It became a bestseller, got turned into a Netflix series. They changed everything, of course, made me younger and better looking, turned the Watchers into generic aliens, added a love story that never happened. But buried in all that Hollywood nonsense was the real message. Connection is what saves us. From entropy, from isolation, from ourselves. I still go out to the viewing area sometimes, especially on clear nights when the lights are active. I bring a lawn chair and a beer, just like the tourists, but I'm not there for the show. I'm there to check on my brother. Last week, on the anniversary of the day I went through the portal, the lights did something new. They formed a pattern I'd never seen before, and in the center, as clear as a photograph, was Carlos's face. He was smiling, and behind him I could see the colony they'd built, impossible architecture that somehow looked like home, children playing in gardens that grew in 3 dimensions, humans and Watchers working side by side. "Hey, hermano." His voice came through, not in my ears, but in my mind. "We're doing good here. The barrier's holding strong. The kids born here, they're something special. They can see solutions to problems that neither species could solve alone. We're not just surviving, we're thriving. Any regrets? I asked. About staying? Number, this is where I need to be. We're the guardians now, making sure the door stays closed but the windows stay open. It's good work, important work. And Mike, thanks for not giving up on us, for finding the third option. The connection faded and the lights returned to their usual dance. But I sat there for hours afterward, thinking about choices, about sacrifice, about the thin lines between worlds. Anna Morales died last month at 97. Before she passed, she gave me something, another obsidian knife, identical to the one I'd planted in the other reality. For when the barrier weakens, she said, and it will. Everything does, eventually. But that's not a bad thing. Barriers are meant to be crossed, just carefully, respectfully. The knife isn't just a wall, it's a gate. And gates need guardians on both sides. She was right, of course. The barrier has been showing signs of wear lately. Not failing, just thinning in spots. The research station has detected quantum fluctuations that suggest the two realities are beginning to synchronize in certain ways. Not merging, but harmonizing, like two instruments slowly tuning to each other. Dr. Chen thinks it's the children, the ones born in the colony. They're creating new connections between the worlds, ones that don't require feeding or invasion. They're building bridges made of understanding rather than exploitation. In another generation, maybe two, we might not need the barrier at all. We might be ready to coexist in the same space, two species that have learned to see reality from each other's perspective. But that's a future problem for future guardians. For now, I sit in my little house outside Marfa, watching the lights dance on the horizon. Sometimes they're just lights, photons bouncing off atmospheric particles, creating pretty patterns for the tourists. But sometimes they're windows, showing glimpses of another world where my brother and 996 others stand guard, ensuring that both realities have a chance to grow, to evolve, to find their own paths through the cosmic dark. The tourists still come, still set up their lawn chairs, still make up theories about what the lights are. UFOs, they say. Ghosts, swamp gas, car headlights, and I let them believe what they want. The truth, that they're watching communication between two species separated by dimensional barriers, that they're witnessing the aftermath of a prevented invasion, that they're seeing the guardians who keep both worlds safe, would be too much for most people. But every once in a while, someone sees more. A child, usually, or an artist, or someone whose mind is naturally tuned to impossible frequencies. They see the faces and the lights, hear the music of the spheres, feel the presence of the watchers and the human colonists on the other side. And when they do, I take them aside and tell them a piece of the truth. Not all of it. That would be cruel. But enough to let them know that the universe is stranger and more wonderful than they imagined, and that sometimes, just sometimes, humanity rises to meet that strangeness with courage instead of fear. The government still monitors everything, of course. There are satellites dedicated to watching the lights, underground bunkers full of scientists studying the quantum signatures, contingency plans for if the barrier fails. But they've mostly left me alone since I retired. Professional courtesy, maybe, or recognition that I've already done my part. 3 weeks ago, something new happened. A young woman showed up at my door, Maria Santos's oldest daughter, Elena. She'd been 8 when her mother almost became the 1,000th victim. "Sheriff Ramirez," she said, though I hadn't been sheriff for a year. "I need to know what really happened that night. I've been having dreams. Dreams about lights, about another place, about people living in an impossible city. And in the dreams, someone who looks like you is planting a black glass tree that holds up the sky. So I told her everything. The contract, the portal, the colony, the barrier. She listened without interrupting, and when I was done, she nodded like it all made perfect sense. "I want to help," she said. "I want to be a guardian too." "It's dangerous," I warned, "and thankless. Most people will think you're crazy if you tell them the truth. But it's important." "Yes." She's at the research station now, working with Dr. Chen, learning to read the patterns in the lights. She has a gift for it, an intuitive understanding of the quantum language the Watchers use. Jen thinks Elena might be able to do something none of us have managed. Establish real-time, two-way communication with the colony. Not just messages and images, but actual conversation. The world is changing, slowly, carefully, but changing. The secret of the Marfa lights won't stay secret forever. Eventually, humanity will have to acknowledge that we're not alone, that there are other forms of consciousness in the universe, and that we've already fought and made peace with one of them. When that day comes, I hope we're ready. I hope the guardians on both sides have done their job, keeping the peace, maintaining the barrier, building understanding instead of fear. I hope the children born in the colony, who see reality from both perspectives, can teach us how to expand our consciousness without losing our humanity. But tonight, none of that matters. Tonight, I'm just an old man sitting in the desert, watching lights dance on the horizon, knowing that my brother is out there, somewhere between here and impossible, standing guard over two worlds. The tourists are starting to arrive for tonight's viewing. They'll set up their cameras, hoping to capture something unexplainable. They'll see the lights move in patterns that don't quite make sense, colors that shouldn't exist, and they'll go home with stories about the mysterious Marfa lights. They have no idea they're witnessing humanity's first successful interdimensional peace treaty, enforced by 997 volunteer guardians who gave up their world to save both. They don't know that every dancing light is a message of hope from the other side, a promise that the barrier holds, that both species continue to grow and learn, and that's probably for the best. Some truths are too big to swallow all at once. Better to let humanity adjust slowly to the idea that we're part of something larger, stranger, and more wonderful than we ever imagined. As for me, I'll keep watching. Keep listening for Carlos's voice in the lights. Keep the obsidian knife safe in case it's ever needed again. Because I'm still the sheriff, even if the badge is retired. Still sworn to protect and serve. It's just that now my jurisdiction extends a little further than Presidio County, Texas. It extends all the way to the space between worlds, where the lights dance and the guardians keep watch, ensuring that two realities can coexist without destroying each other. The Marfa lights were never UFOs. They were never ghosts. They were a door, then a wound, then a window, and now they're a bridge. And on both sides of that bridge stand humans, changed, evolved, but still human, keeping watch, keeping faith, keeping the peace between worlds. That's the truth about the Marfa lights. Now you know what I know. What you do with that knowledge is up to you. But if you ever find yourself in West Texas, watching those lights dance on the horizon, remember, you're not just seeing an unexplained phenomenon. You're seeing proof that humanity can face the impossible and choose cooperation over conquest, understanding over fear. You're seeing my brother and 996 others standing guard in another reality, making sure both worlds have a chance to thrive. And maybe, if you look closely enough, if you're open to impossible truths, you'll see them looking back.